Cool, cool. Thanks for dialing in, everyone. Happy Thursday or Friday, wherever you are. And if folks maybe want to drop into the chat and share their name and where they're dialing in from and what they're excited to learn about today, that would be really fun. It's nice to see with the virtual events just how much global presence we have in one space. And I'll give it a couple of minutes. Hey, Hendrik. Right, maybe let's give it one more minute and then we can get started. Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us here today. We are here as a part of Accelerate Energy series, which is an event series put on by New Energy Nexus, which is a bit of a conversation around what it means to accelerate the global clean energy startup ecosystem to be diverse, inclusive, and economically empowering. And as we explore this inquiry, we know that it takes a holistic, multifaceted, multi-stakeholder approach to build the clean energy ecosystem that we know we want to see in the world. So for the past few weeks, we've been exploring topics from the relationship between policy and innovation, what it means to be a startup in emerging markets, what it means to have energy access in emerging markets, and how startups and corporates can collaborate together more effectively. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about what it means to bring an equity lens to entrepreneur support programs. So we have an incredible lineup here, and we get to hear more about practices from all different types of programs from all over the world, and hopefully walk away with some tools and new ideas for how to bring this about our everyday work and embody it day to day. So with that, I'll pass this along to Mariah, and we will take us through the conversation, and we'll drop more information in the chat as well. If you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to drop them into the Q&A. We have some time at the end. Cool. Thanks so much, everyone.
Good evening. I am Mariah Lichtenstein, founding partner of Diversity Ventures, where we capitalize on diverse perspectives and back founders committed to positive social, economic, and environmental impact and outsized returns. In this role and adjacent to it, I work with a lot of entrepreneur support organizations. And I'm so happy that the Greenlining Institute invited me to join on the Technology Entrepreneur Development Initiative. It's a lot to say. It's also known as CalSeed, which is a $24 million grant program created to help early stage California clean energy startups bring their concepts and prototypes to market. CalSeed is administered by New Energy Nexus on behalf of the California Energy Commission, and it's funded through the Electric Program Investment Charge. CalSeed, I would just love to thank them and New Energy Nexus team for the phenomenal work you do and for including me here and in the programs. It's an honor to welcome you to the Accelerate Energy series, a collection of events for innovators, leaders, investors, accelerators, and entrepreneurs in the global clean energy startup ecosystem. We all know this year has been extraordinary. It was off to a rocky start when we lost Kobe Bryant. And we've been pummeled by a global pandemic. We've been shaken by a social justice awakening and dismayed by political precedents that impact climate policy. Here in California, forest fires billowed and rained ash on our doorsteps as a reminder of climate change. It feels like this year, no one has been unscathed, but the silver line, forge ahead creatively and to innovate with energy solutions that are designed with equitable outcomes in mind. The Accelerate Energy series helps to facilitate this coming together with candid conversation, knowledge transfer, and the opportunity to connect and collaborate with your clean energy peers, which the startup ecosystem to be diverse, inclusive, and economically empowering. At Diversity Ventures, we have a saying, diversity includes you. We define diversity like the dictionary, as a state of being diverse, variety, and the practice or quality of including or involving people from a range of different social and ethnic backgrounds and of different genders, sexual orientations, geographies, experiences, skill sets, perspectives, and more. It's not meant to exclude anyone, but for a long time, diversity has been a hot topic triggering all kinds of feelings. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it should be how truly connected we are. This world belongs to all of us, and it's going to take all of us to prevent and overcome existential threats. There are a lot of assumptions and misconceptions. There are wounds around diversity that we must dismantle to harness its power, and diversity is powerful. And what better place to harness that power than right here at the New Energy series, right? So let's talk about it, shall we? In tonight's panel, incorporating an equity lens into entrepreneur support programs, we're going to highlight best practices from Southeast Asia, India, California, all around the world. We have an incredible panel of leaders here to spark the discussion, and I'm delighted to introduce them to you. So without further ado, we'll get started. Caitlin Tate is co-founder of YGAP, director of the YHER program, and manages learning design for YGAP collaborations. Over the last decade, Caitlin has launched and grown the YGAP model across Africa and Asia Pacific, supporting hundreds of impact ventures. She has designed, delivered, and overseen entrepreneurship programs that have changed the lives of over 1 million people living in poverty. Caitlin is responsible for learning, design, and content development for YGAP's Global Accelerator Program, facilitation training, and ecosystem collaborations, and has most recently been working alongside entrepreneur support organizations across Southeast Asia, helping them to apply a gender lens to their work using the Gender Lens Incubation and Acceleration Toolkit. Welcome, Caitlin. In about 2 minutes or so, tell us a bit more about your work and how you see the connection between diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, and mitigating climate change.
Thanks, Mariah. And thank you to New Energy Nexus for having me today. Really excited to be here. So I guess a bit of background on myself and YGAP. YGAP supports early stage social impact ventures, and they're all running locally led solutions to local problems. So we do that in South Africa, Kenya, Bangladesh, Australia, and the Pacific Islands. And we also run a female-focused program called YHER, which is run across Africa and the Pacific and supports female-led ventures with the preference for those who are actually supporting women and girls through their work. And my main focus most recently, has really been on curriculum and content development for our global accelerators and our YGAP collaborations team, which, as Mariah mentioned, we've recently been part of developing that Gender Lens Incubation and Acceleration Toolkit. And have been running a capacity building program to work with these entrepreneur support organizations across Southeast Asia to use that toolkit to apply a gender lens to their work and also to measure the impact of those strategies that they're applying. And, you know, through my own, I guess, entrepreneurial journey, I became really interested in the difference between my experience as a woman and that of my male co-founder, who was also my husband. And, you know, I started to pay attention to and become pretty passionate about what holds women back, particularly women entrepreneurs. And so we launched YHER to try and be able, try and level the playing field for women entrepreneurs, specifically those who are working in the social impact space. And we're now in the process at YGAP of incorporating gender lens across all our programs and partnerships. And I'm really excited to be here joining this conversation today. Through the recent work that I've been doing, I've had some really fascinating conversations with the organizations we've been working with around the challenges specific to clean energy, but can also share my experience working with YGAP and other accelerator programs more globally that are attempting to build these principles into their work. And I just think it is so important. While I don't work specifically in clean energy, I think there is so much importance in terms of, women have such an amazing knowledge of their local community, and unfortunately, they are disproportionately impacted by climate change, but they're not usually the ones driving the technologies and innovations. And I think we do need more women, more diverse voices to be driving these innovations so that they meet the needs of, meet their needs and the needs of their communities. So really excited to contribute to the conversation today.
Thank you so much, Caitlin. Zui Zoshi is a program manager and head of Impact and Climate Collective. She manages and facilitates different acceleration programs for startups and climate and clean tech program for women in India. She has been an impact consultant measuring natural and social impact across corporates and public utilities. She continues to support startups by helping them measure impact. Welcome, Zui. Tell us more about the work you do and the role of DEI.
Great. Thank you so much, Mariah, and very honored to be part of this panel. I think it's really a crucial discussion at this time. So let me start with giving a little bit background about my organization, Climate Collective. We also work very closely with New Energy Nexus, so very happy to be here as well. So we at the Climate Collective, we run climate and clean tech startup support programs in early stages across South Asia. Undoubted to say that we are the biggest platform right now supporting climate and clean tech entrepreneurs, specifically in early stages, I should say. So that means that we have a very, very large number of entrepreneurs coming to us in our programs over 4 years now. These numbers are somewhere ranging around 400. And about 2 years back, what we realized is that we're missing out on a very important component, and not many women are really applying to our programs or even being selected as a part of the programs eventually. And this is what causes a lot of concern and worry, and we're wondering why this is the case. I remember that we had our national finals of the biggest program that we run called Climate Launchpad. There were 75 startups that were pitching after going through our programs. And they were divided into 3 rooms. And 2 of those rooms, I was literally the only woman in the room. And that's when I realized, and I distinctly remember this, there was this one boy who got up to pitch. And he said, hello, everybody, hello, friends, hello, gentlemen, and respected lady. That's when I looked around and I was the only lady in the room. And I realized that this is not right, this has to stop. And that's when we started our women's support program, specifically started running them. The major goal that we work towards is empowering women, capacity building at earlier stages, helping them learn business literacy skills better, instilling confidence, network building, and really helping them through the initial stages and making sure that they don't drop the idea at a very early stage and really power through and help them leverage further opportunities that are present in the ecosystem, which I think is really crucial. There's a lot of support out there, but it's really instilling that amount of confidence and the initial skills to help them leverage it further. So we run these programs called Climate Ready for Women, and are looking to run them across various domains, clean energy and other domains that we work in waste to value, etc. There are other concerns apart from gender diversity in the ecosystem that we work, particularly the rural-urban divide, economic divide, linguistic barriers. But this is one that we're focusing on right now, but really looking at all of these other aspects to inculcate in our curriculum to reduce these barriers. Very excited to be part of the further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Zui. And I love that you emphasize confidence. I like to say confidence is contagious. Okay, so Natalie Moreno is Equity and Access Innovation Manager at Elemental Accelerator, where she facilitates the creation of a toolkit to help elemental startups and the tech sector navigate best practices to scale in a just and inclusive way. She leads the Elemental's Equity In approach and is a resource to the portfolio, helping companies develop just internal operations. Thanks for joining us, Natalie. Please elaborate on your work and the connection between.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalie. I lead the efforts to build this field guide for operationalizing equity in your company. Basically, Elemental Accelerator advances solutions to climate change and deploys them in communities that need them the most. So each year we find 15 to 20 companies that best fit our mission, and we fund each company up to $1 million to improve systems that impact people's lives, such as energy, mobility, water, agriculture, and beyond. And so our specialty is really looking at systems-based solutions for things. And we really focused on equity in that manner. So instead of diversity, equity, and inclusion, we refer to our model as equity in, equity out. So we see equity as a positive feedback loop. If you're thinking about equity inside your company, if you're thinking about equity in your supply chain with your employees, in your leadership, if you're thinking about equity in your professional development, it's going to reflect with your relationship with your customers and external stakeholders. And vice versa, if you're thinking about equity with your external stakeholders, you're going to have to look inside and see if you're walking the walk and talking, or what is it? Walking, one of those. My idioms need help sometimes. So yeah, but that's the, like, you want to be able to practice what you preach. And so that's what we're helping our startups do, because with this field guide, it's the answer to our startups. Like, okay, well, we need to be more equitable. We get that, but how? And we want to make it operationable, which is basically giving folks a starting point, giving them a framework on how to assess where they are and what their metrics should be, which is the biggest question. What are my metrics? How do I measure it? And then map out a strategy for a journey on equity, because it is a journey. So first they figure out what their vision for their company is in terms of equity and what it means for them. So even clarifying that meaning is a big thing. Why should I even invest in my time into equity? And what is my connection to diverse populations? I think that's a big mystery for a lot of companies who maybe don't serve frontline communities. That's what we call them, folks that are affected by climate change the worst. Maybe it's a mystery how their technology specifically impacts frontline communities, but they do, even if it's in a roundabout way. There are negative externalities that you may not have thought about when you're deploying your technology that may have unintended consequences for frontline communities. So we started backwards, and we came up with, we interviewed community-based organizations, and we asked them, what does it mean to be an equitable company? How would an equitable company behave toward you? Because ultimately that's the impact that we want to have. That's why we have equity in companies, so that we can positively impact these communities that are affected the most by climate change. And basically our premise is that the practices that got us into the climate crisis are the exact same practices that marginalize people. So they're very much linked. So that's the connection between climate change, and that's how we're approaching our work.
Wonderful. Well, we are going to demystify some things today and get us going in the right direction. A lot of times we just do things because that's how they've always been done, and we just subscribe to it, but we are shifting here. So next, Zara Jamshade is a technical coordinator with California Solar on multifamily affordable housing, SOMA, program at Grid Alternatives. And by the way, Zara identifies as they, them, and they completed a BA in Engineering Arts and a concentration in climate change at Smith College, where they gained experience as a peer-to-peer social justice educator. Outside of GRID, Zara is Bay Area organizer with Queer Crescent Building Community, Safe Healing Arts, and Justice with LGBTQ plus Muslims. Woo! Tongue twisters. They believe racial, economic, and climate justice are possible when we are able to dream liberatory futures through art and connection. Zara, what more can you share about your work and how you see the connection between DEI and addressing climate change?
Hi, everyone. So I do not come from a venture entrepreneurship world. I feel like I would misuse any of those words. So I will have a slightly different perspective than the rest of the panelists. But I have been at Grid Alternatives for almost 3 years, the nation's largest solar nonprofit, and 2 of them working on California's Solar on Multifamily Affordable Housing, or SOMA program, which is a flagship program for multifamily solar with up to $100 million a year for 10 years, with the goal to provide economic and environmental benefit to California's low-income renters. But I am also arriving at this conversation as a young clean energy professional who has participated in a very targeted workforce development program for the clean energy workforce. GRID has a program called Solar Core, which is a 1-year fellowship program that helps bring folks that are new to the industry, help them get training and the support they need to pursue a career in renewable energy. So that's the hat I'm arriving with, but also just by nature of holding all of the identities that I do, I am often a non-normative body in normative spaces. Like was stated, I am a non-binary trans person and my pronouns are they, them. I am a Muslim person, I'm a queer person, I'm a disabled person, and a person of color. So my presence is generally disruptive in any sort of normative ecosystem, not necessarily in a bad way. I think that holding all of that allows me a not necessarily unique, but a multifaceted analysis to conversations about equity and inclusion. And how I collide with these systems often teaches me a lot about the folks who built these systems, and can also help identify opportunities to make a more inclusive work environment. So I am excited to be here, especially excited to get into some conversations about gender. I have a lot of feelings about that. Yeah, I'm excited. Let's go.
Well, I'm excited to have all these diverse perspectives because that's what I like to capitalize on. I love to learn from panelists like yourselves that come from different backgrounds and geographies and all the different ways of seeing our world. So let's jump right in. We are here supporting entrepreneurs and also those who work for them and businesses, right? So what are the benefits of diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice for entrepreneurs? Is it fair to say that it makes dollars as much as it makes sense? So we can start with anyone.
I'm happy to jump in. I think, the research definitely shows it does make, it does make a lot of sense and dollars. We know from the research that gender diversity in executive teams is correlated with greater profitability and value creation. We know that actually companies with more women are likely to introduce more radical innovations. And that, women in leadership positions, we have higher levels of performance, can also lead to stronger relationships in value chains, supply chains. And also leads to better decision making. So I think there's a lot of evidence out there that shows that it affects much more than the impact side of things, but that it also supports the bottom line.
Just to add to that, I would say all of that is true. And of course, the research definitely shows that if we have the same input of resources given to a women-led company, there would be greater profits given. So that perspective is one, but I think the second one is also that being a consumer and a big consumer in a way also gives better insights that cannot come from just a male dominated entrepreneurship, innovation led entrepreneurship. It has to come from consumer insights. And I think solar cook stoves is such a great example of that happening, because women are the ones who are cooking in the households, and they do need innovation which impacts them, which would generally not come from a pure male perspective. So I think the diversity of innovations also which come forth is very, very important to this transition.
Yeah, I'd like to add, specific to the United States, by 2045, most people in this country will be people of color. So it's just a matter of survival at this point. If you're not thinking about it, in 25 years, your workforce, your customers, the landscape is much different in 2045 than it is now. So, and that's just by virtue of birth. Folks we've got a boomer population that we're replacing, that young people of color are replacing. So it's just a matter of survival, I think. And it's also market intelligence. You're really looking at your customers. And there's numerous studies. There's just the business case for diversity has been made. There are just numerous studies that cite that a diverse group is higher performing than a group of highly educated, highly capable folks that are homogenous. They will outperform that group just because of the diversity of their perspectives. So I think it's really important to note that at this point, it's just a given. Your company probably won't have as much chance to survive in the new world that we're building if you're not on board and looking at everybody's differences and figuring out how to maximize the just the depth of knowledge that's out there.
Okay, and so how can we be more visionary in our understanding of gender, race, and the environment? I'd like to start with Zara on this one, because we seldom look beyond binary gender and racialized descriptors when we have these discussions around diversity. So, tell us what your thoughts are.
Sure, happy to. Where are all the notes? So I guess I'll start with the example. There was a blog that I was reading that was talking about how to get your job application noticed by an employer. And something that one of the reviewers had written was that if I receive an application that doesn't have male or female listed, I automatically throw it out. And it was really like shocking to hear, especially since we globally are expanding our cultural understanding, within the West, we're expanding our understanding of the construct of gender and seeing gender as something that is self-determined and not something that is biologically determined. I identify as someone who's non-binary, but there are other types of trans folks who may identify within the binary. And I guess just an example of ways in which like equity efforts to try and increase gender literacy can manifest in workplaces is by asking people what their pronouns are. And that is such a simple device to acknowledge the assumption that I cannot know what your pronouns are just by looking at you. Like, there is no one way to look or be trans. You cannot just automatically know that someone is trans. And like, discrimination against trans people, particularly in this administration, has been really rampant. Our president has pushed forward legislation that would make it harder for trans people to seek assistance from single-sex homeless shelters in the middle of a global pandemic where unemployment and houselessness are already a crisis within the trans community. And there just is no way that like transness will not intersect with climate. This is actually kind of perfect timing because this week is Transgender Awareness Week. And tomorrow is Trans Day of Mourning, which is a day where the trans community grieves for those who are taken from us by transphobic violence. So I encourage anyone who's looking to expand their understanding of gender and to show solidarity for trans people by consuming media by trans folks. There's a documentary on Netflix. It's called Disclosure. It talks about trans representation in media and how it manifests the way we treat trans people in real life. This has definitely been kind of a tangent, but I want to leave us with the slogan, love us while we're here. Like, we are a part of your community. And if you're seeking equity in any sort of context, like, we can't just stop it like, oh, if this is male or female, isn't male or female, I'm going to throw it out. Like, how do we be intentionally open to the possibility of having a more gender diverse workforce and community?
Thank you so much. That really helped to set a tone on something that doesn't often get a lot of attention. And I appreciate you informing us about the next couple of days so that we can go and inform ourselves if we're not already informed. I will be increasing my literacy. And if you have a chance to type the documentary in the chat, I'll also put that on the playlist. You know, I just remember you brought to mind something when I was an undergrad. I took a class on human sexuality. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting is, you know, just the different ways that our chromosomes come together and how that manifests. And I mean, truly speaking, people are born so many different ways that aren't obvious. And some people have discovered things, you know, even later in life that were, they weren't aware of at birth or told about, and decisions were made for them. And so, you know, a lot of times we impose our beliefs that people should act a certain way or another, and not really take into consideration the nature and how diverse nature is. So I think that things are like that for a reason, and I hope that we can be more inclusive in the gender binary, non-binary, gender and non-gender conforming, and just all the other things that can be. So
a lot of that is legacies of white supremacy and capitalism. Like non-divergent or non-binary genders have existed like across the world for generations prior to colonization. And it's one of the ways in which like civilization was imposed on colonized peoples. So that's the same system that has led us to this extractive nature with our resources for our energy, for our fuel, like all of that same like delineation and like compartmentalization into categories that has everything to do with climate change. And if clean energy is going to be part of the solution, then like unlearning some of that like capitalistic and colonial behavior like is going to have to be a part of it.
Yes, I agree. I love that. And that obviously really sparked off and it kind of pointed to another area of diversity that entrepreneurs need to be aware of. And, you know, that's around even our economic systems and how those may be innovated upon to better serve our economic and ecological needs as a global community. So thank you so much for that. Are there any other thoughts around being visionary around race, gender, the environment? Anyone else want to chime in there?
I think it's important to emphasize, Zara, that you said something really powerful about visioning, about you know, that there not only are we rooted in a past where other cultures and even European cultures visioned different genders and had another view of gender. It's rooted in our past, but it's also visioning our future. And I think that's the through line, is that we are being rooted deeply in our interconnectedness, recognizing, you know, our dependency on each other. I think that this year has shed a lot about, especially through COVID and, you know, all of the climate disasters that are happening. Something that happened in China has affected the whole world, and vice versa. You know, the US is the biggest polluter in all of history, and we're affecting the whole planet. So I think that it's really important to acknowledge how interconnected and interdependent we are, and that we have dealt with a variety of situations in the past in our own history, but we have to delve and look into other cultures and see how we've handled it and try and vision a new future together. And I think that's important, is to, like, we're rooted in equity, in these values and these principles if we want to change the world, but we're also imagining a whole new world that looks and feels so much better, because the oppression of the gender binary, and it just feels restrictive, it feels nasty. It feels, when we see a ocean full of plastic, it feels restrictive, it feels nasty. And so we're actually imagining a better world by letting go of some of our preconceived notions of what prosperity is and what, you know, what being normal is.
Also, I feel like I work in the women focused space, but I mean, I'm trying to remember whether there's even any data which talks beyond the binary and talks about inclusiveness from other genders. I don't even know how many entrepreneurs are coming up from different genders to lead. You know, there is no data, nobody's collecting it, and that's so sad. We have no idea how inclusive they are at all, you know, and which is so sad. I think that's the basis where we should even start looking at it, because the point at which we start looking at, say, for example, women entrepreneurship is in India. There are only 15% of all the businesses run by women, and more than 70% are micro enterprises, or I think even more, the percentage levels are. Most of them are self-financed because they are not able to get finance from the ecosystem. But there is no data like this which compares to other genders at all. So where do we even start? How do we know how grave the problem is? So I think really a major, there needs to be a overhaul in the entire attitude towards this inclusiveness. Yeah.
And Zoe, to build on that, I think another challenge I'm seeing around the world is just, not only do we not have the data, but there's such a diversity in where different contexts and cultures are at, as I'm sure you can see where you are. With some of the organizations I've been working with, you know, they're facing the challenge of, you know, their local language doesn't even have you know, words to describe gender. It's solely the binary male, you know, male and female. And so even starting to try and shift that language is hard because the language doesn't exist. And so it's sort of about, how do we, in my mind, I'm, you know, I don't have the answer, but we're really trying to figure out, how do we try and bring, you know, countries and communities forward, but how do we also meet them where they are, and not sort of expect too much too quick, and figuring out where that balance is, I guess, or how do we yeah, I guess, account for those differences when there's actually a lot of work that needs to be done before they can even get anywhere close to where we are in the States, for example. around gender and the language that we can use.
Wow. Gosh, it sounds like we may need to start with some borrowed words. We have a lot of borrowed. We're an international house, and sometimes we marvel at the way my husband's language and my own American English have borrowed words from other cultures. So maybe that's a thought to float out there. Okay, so what are some barriers? What are barriers to diversity and inclusion in your region? Caitlin, you've just touched on some other ones have kind of floated by, but what strategies are you using to create a culture of inclusion in your organization? So for this one, Zui, let's start with you, because you shared a bit about gender, geography, and language, how they come into play, but tell us a bit more.
Sure. So there are many barriers, is what I would like to start with. And I would like to start with one, the women-focused barriers, where I think the entire ecosystem around it starts right from families. Everybody here who's worked with startups know that for an entrepreneur, the familial support is the first primary support that you get to move on, right? But all the when you think about an entrepreneur, what are the keywords that come to your mind? It's like risk-taking, dynamic, confident, and these are not generally the adjectives that you would associate with a woman. At least in the place that I come from, and so there's a lot of resistance from families to support women entrepreneurs. I remember when we were doing one of the cohorts for Climate Ready for Women, there was a woman who came and she said, I have to leave early. I was like, well, what happened? She's like, no, my family doesn't know that I'm even participating in such a program, and they wouldn't like it, so I have to reach home on a particular time. So these are the kind of barriers. I think that's where it all stems from. It starts from. Then moving on to the ecosystem. We try to make sure that there's a right mix of different kinds of mentors and coaches which come from various backgrounds, because I think that's essential to make anybody feel comfortable, to understand diverse perspectives. I mean, in the room that I described before, if you're the only woman, you're going to be intimidated to pitch in front of such a large audience, right? In a by default male setting that we have. So I think these are some of the barriers. Apart from that, there's a large rural-urban divide that is there, and to understand perspectives from a rural background, for them to come and be comfortable in an urban setting where generally most of these programs are run is difficult. A lot of linguistic barriers, especially in such a diverse country like India, where there's a lot of barriers to understanding English that quickly. And I think, as I was discussing before with some on this panel, is that since in these COVID times, we are moving to a more virtual world, it becomes even more difficult, even though it becomes easier to get multiple stakeholders on board. But if there are such barriers like linguistic barriers, it does become hard to reach out to the people who can't come online or can't understand a particular language. So yeah, definitely these are some of the barriers. And I mean, moving from there, the entire, if I touch upon the entire ecosystem, then I would say the financiers, as somebody's put on chat, are primarily men who wouldn't understand perspectives of women. So I think there has to be an entire attitude shift to make it more inclusive ecosystem, more equity based.
Other barriers and ways of addressing them or mitigating them?
I can jump in. The biggest barrier that I've seen is really mindset. It's understanding the water we're swimming in. I think that we have a variety of practices. We can talk about how to revamp your interview process all day, how to look for more diverse suppliers. But unless your company has adopted a mindset of equity, understanding what equity means, how to behave equitably, if you don't see the importance of having the other person that you're bringing into your company who is diverse, if you don't see the value that they bring, that they're just another check the box, then it becomes performative. B, you're not taking advantage of the diversity that's coming into your company. That's the whole reason why we're doing this, is to improve. And so it really is about mindset. And we all know from the political climate right now that changing a mindset is really hard. So I think that it takes a lot of self-work, inner work. That sounds very woo-woo, you know, that's one of the words that we were using today about some of the exercises that we were doing to really recognize where you sit in the context of time and history. So, you know, especially for some, you know, someone in the chat mentioned investors, you know, who are white men. So how do we get them on board? So for now, for the folks that are woke, for lack of a better word right now in my head, it requires a lot of translation, of being very utilitarian and bringing in funds and being very strategic and shrewd with the resources that we do get and using them for good, kind of like Robin Hood at this point. So that's the mitigation, that's the middle ground right now between the place that we want to get and the vision that we want to see. And a strategy that's worked, we're really working on emotions. So people have a very visceral reaction to learning about a painful history, and the history of this country is beautiful in a lot of ways, but it's very painful, and it's still affecting, and things that it's not just history, it's still affecting, and by this country I mean the US, it's still affecting people today. We are seeing the residual effects of discrimination, police brutality, slavery, all of those things, and these things are very real now, but in different ways. And when so it really is about you know, I'm trying not to get like too technical, but something that's really I've seen that has really worked is trauma-informed pedagogy. So basically, people react to things that kind of that negate their view of themselves as a good person. So that creates a very violent reaction that, you know, results in things like fight, flight, freeze. So even if they're not being physically threatened or being threatened, if they're being threatened by a different view of themselves that's not so wholesome, because we are all participating in the system. And so that's a good strategy, is to be mindful of your body when you're encountering these things, so that you can override, you can take a deep breath, and you can actually pay attention to the matter at hand. It really is, I honestly don't see equity or like diversity as like, you know, we have all these a compendium of strategies, but really it's a life skill. Like, how do you listen to people? How do you not react when a hard fact gets across your desk? You know, how do you breathe in the middle of a difficult situation? It really is about life skills. How do you have difficult conversations? And we just need to learn. We're not taught as a society, because our view of leadership is some white dude at the head of the table pounding his fist and getting his way. And that's just not going to work anymore if we want to get out of this problem.
I can add to that and just say, I think 100% agree that the mindset is crucial. And that is one of the barriers we see in some of the organizations we've been supporting is, you know, they might be on board with this, but actually getting it past their management, it becomes a harder thing. And what we're finding is really the most useful is being able to have the data to back it up. So we are really trying to work with organizations to do that extra research, do the tests to see, you know, for example, one of the groups, she had said that they were having a conversation about what kinds of content the women entrepreneurs in their program needed. And they did a survey to work that out. And the male manager felt that confidence wouldn't be an issue for these entrepreneurs because they're entrepreneurs, they're go-getters, they'll be fine, you know, and you know, when the survey came back, confidence and imposter syndrome was the number one thing that the women felt that they needed. And so it was just sort of being able to have that data to back it up, to make the case and build the business case for why this is important and the impact it will have on the organization, I think is crucial.
I think maybe because I'm coming from like a nonprofit EJ-esque kind of workspace, I feel like I've seen something very different with barriers to equity work. I think the majority of folks where I work, for example, are like, yes, great, I love it, let's go. Also, I'm really busy and like, I don't have time to do this extra work to talk and think and get woo-woo about like systemic racism within the United States and like how gender-based discrimination like impacts our like who takes notes during the meeting. Like there are, so I think it can feel really abstract to people. I think that we are so used to having conversations where like, it's not our differences that count, it's what brings us together that like allows us to like cooperate and work together. And so it's hard for us to be like, oh, like your experience as a white person is fundamentally different than mine. And like, these are the like global factors that have shaped like how that's true. So I think it's seen as extra. Oftentimes within workplaces, the like spaces to have those conversations will be separate from like the actual work. And I think to me, one of the clearest solutions is like starts when you're writing a job description. You're going to be like 5% of the time you are engaging in equity work. So now it's baked into what you already do instead of something that's seen as like extraneous or like just for, you know, the social justice warriors of our group. So embedding it and like not making it separate feels like structurally important. And then another thing I feel like is for marginalized folks to see themselves in like positions of leadership. And a lot of that, I think, like fear can be mitigated with like really solid mentorship programs. Like I did an internship at a very like mainstream green organization. And out of a total of like 30 interns, only 3 of us were people of color. I was like, oh, okay. This like clearly this space wasn't designed for me. I can't see myself working here. I'm out. Like, I don't think that this like is in alignment with my values. My vision of the world is full of diverse perspectives. And so diverse mentors for the diverse group of people is critical to not just being in the door, but like retaining talent and like helping talent like rise and succeed beyond like entry level positions.
I love that you're touching on some policy type of issues that can address the systemic barriers to inclusion, and it's also touching on a question that's in the Q&A. So I want to take a pause for a moment to let those who are listening in know that we hear you, we see you, and we want to hear from you. So please do drop your questions in the Q&A. I am looking at them, and I have and they are being extracted from the chat to put into the Q&A so that we don't miss what you're trying to say scrolling through. So we welcome your participation. And so Zara, to continue on with what you just started touching on, what are some best practices for companies and or organizations to make transgender or non-binary people also feel included specifically?
I love this question. So I think step one is ask everyone for their pronouns, and remember them when they say them. This sounds very obvious, and yet there are still people who I have worked with for almost 3 years who occasionally will forget. And it's important to remember. So please remember. Otherwise, it just becomes this like weird like political theater where we all like think we're doing a really good job, but like haven't actually accomplished anything, and gets very frustrating very quickly. I would say like gender neutral bathrooms are, I think, contested, but important. And actually read a book on like data gaps in like about gender. And it was like purely from a binary perspective. And it said that like gender neutral bathrooms were like bad. And this was a feminist. I don't agree. Gender neutral bathrooms, they're not complicated. And then competent transgender healthcare. And the key is to not ask your trans employees about it, because that is really inappropriate. So thankfully, we live in a world where Google exists. And if you don't know what someone's identity means, you can ask them. And yeah, I encourage organizations to hire trans people who are out there, particularly in the Bay Area. I know a couple, like trans equity consultants, who would be more than happy to take a look at folks' healthcare plans and company handbooks and make sure that you're using gender neutral language in all of your stuff, even if it's supposedly for single sex initiatives. Like I went to a women's college and we still use gender neutral language with everything, and nothing bad happened, and it was fine. Yeah.
For the record, I have gender neutral bathrooms in my home.
We should hope so.
I love having gender neutral and family bathrooms out in public. So, you know, something we need to innovate on, not that, you know, people can't feel comfortable in their own ways of doing things, but we can certainly have all the options if we need a little transitional period or something. But those are some really, you know, solid and actionable suggestions. So thanks for sharing. And we will offline have to talk about making some of those connections around consultants, because I
got you
that information. So another question that came out, and I think this one was for Natalie. Okay, but everyone feel free to jump in here. This is from the audience. How will entrepreneurs make progress in equity and inclusion when the money they need is from investors who are primarily white men? And Natalie, what's an example of a strategy you've used or seen that has worked?
So we are still developing our strategy around this. So I will say that, so the way that we developed this field guide is we started with focus groups. First, we started with focus groups with a community-based organization to teach us what equity actually looked like for them, so that we can ground our efforts in the principles that we found after interviewing them. Then we also interviewed a focus group of we interviewed our founders. So we interviewed non-BIPOC founders. So that stands for Black, Indigenous people of color. And we interviewed BIPOC founders. So we wanted to see what the differences in support would be between those groups. And so the third focus group that we interviewed was our ecosystem, which included a number of investors. And what we found is that investors are crucial in incentivizing equitable behavior, because they are the ones that are mandating how an entrepreneur spends their time. So if they are on board, then you know, you're golden. You can start, you know, really investing in that in your company. And so one of the things that our founders mentioned, especially our Black, Indigenous people of color founders who were navigating this world, especially if they're part of a frontline community or come from a frontline community and understand the challenges, is that they needed to do a lot of translation. So that so what you said, Caitlin, about the business case, that is effective, especially as a means to an end. You'd have to talk about, instead of, we're doing the right thing by reaching folks in frontline communities, you're saying we're opening up a new customer base, and these are the numbers behind that customer base. Instead of saying, we're hiring lots of brown people because it's the right thing, we're saying, actually, we are increasing diversity because it's going to yield, we're innovating on this new technology, and we want, a product that serves these people. So it really is about knowing your numbers and knowing who you're serving and having that market intelligence and convincing your investors that way. It's really hard because, if you're a diehard capitalist and you're just like, people are utilities, it's really, it's to a certain, like, you can only take this to as far as it goes if you want to be a purist about equity. But I mean, it's a starting point, especially if you have investors that aren't particularly invested. But I think the political climate, especially from like everybody and their mother has some sort of anti-racism statement on their website. Now because of that, we have the opportunity to call them out when they're not really living that out, or call them in, as they say, to call out versus call in culture. Yeah, I think that now there's an opportunity to hold folks accountable to saying, okay, you posted that anti-racism statement in July. What does that look like in December? What are you doing? Folks are much more keen on at least looking like they're not as performative as they are, or they're genuinely interested in changing how they're doing their practices. But yeah.
Other thoughts on overcoming where the capital is coming from? I know I have some, okay, go ahead, Caitlin.
I was just going to say one thing we're doing, obviously that is a huge barrier. I think some of the strategies that we recommend are, working with ecosystem players like mentors and investors to do awareness training around bias and things like this, because sometimes they're just completely not aware that that exists, or that they're viewing some of these investments with that bias. But one thing we're also trying to do through our Why Her Africa program at the moment is we're sort of shifting our focus a little bit to try and bridge that funding gap between investors and female entrepreneurs, female-led ventures, because obviously there's a gap not only in how much funding gets there, but also in what women ventures need. And sometimes I think the ecosystem has expected women to meet investors where they are, rather than investors meeting women where they are in terms of what kind of funding they need. And so we're doing some research and working with some investment firms who are interested in impact investing and supporting women, to think about how can we creatively bridge this gap, and how can we not just expect women to get there, but actually shift the way investors and the type of investment that they're giving as well.
This is also something that I've been working on through the Aspen Tech Policy Hub on a project called Tech Funding Equity, and I'll drop the link in the chat, is bridging that gap. And I just wanted to touch on something that Zui had mentioned early on around confidence, and it's come up a few different times in the conversation. And, I just want to throw out there for the person or people who asked this question that what I found too is, when you're in a male dominated and white cis male dominated environment, sometimes assumptions are thrown out as facts, right? Like, oh, it's like that because of this. And, sometimes it's just a reflection of the culture and the norms that exist in all different types of environments, that view may not necessarily be unchangeable. And if you have the confidence to say, well, actually, this is what we found, or actually, this is actually the case, you might find that, as Caitlin had indicated, that, people may not be aware, or they may be just very open to hearing an opposing view if you go ahead and push back in a just very candid and not necessarily even hostile or offended way, but just realizing that that's just that those kinds of assumptions and statements are just kind of a cultural norm. And by pushing back against it, it's actually a way of learning. And you might find that you're even more successful than you might expect, or that people may be more open to these different views than you might think. That's been my experience, having worked with a lot of white men and having been raised by them as well. But okay, any other thoughts on that before we move ahead to some other things that have been touched on? Like we could do a little.
I would just like to add a little bit to that. So Maya, what you said is completely true, but I think to build that confidence really is difficult because of the such deep sociocultural biases that are there. I would say even within women themselves, that they are always second guessing that whether it's right or not right. I think these are the major things. So in the survey that we did post a program about what kind of support that they appreciated the most. We did a series of founder talks where we got in other women entrepreneurs to come and talk about their experiences and how they navigated certain situations where they faced barriers. And this was rated the highest. That they found this the most useful because they could build on somebody else's experiences. And I was there in those webinars, and some of the questions they asked were as simple as, we go to these networking events, business networking events, and there are a group of men standing and talking. And I don't know, I want to join the conversation because I want to make a connect with somebody in that group, but I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to get into that group. There's just simple things like this. But it's so crucial that you just have somebody to talk to, somebody to talk about their experiences and really mentor you. And I think Zara was also talking about mentorship and the importance of it. And I can't stress on it enough. I think that's one of the major barriers, lack of role models and lack of right mentors. So whoever is supporting in the ecosystem, if the same women can come back and give back to the ecosystem and really start mentoring others who are coming in, I think this is like a equity in, equity out, also, as Natalie was saying, in a different context too.
We also, just to add to that, are in the process of developing some content to share with accelerators and incubators that is gender specific. So to address some of these key barriers, a session around imposter syndrome and confidence, negotiation skills, even just a basic gender 101 training for teams who don't feel that they have that basic level of knowledge. But I agree. I think, sometimes it is as basic as these women don't feel that they can participate in these forums. And I think a huge sort of solution to that or strategy is that these organizations should be thinking about really simple ways. And this is what we are trying to encourage through the toolkit that we've developed, is what are simple ways to actually just shift these kind of events and to be more inclusive of women and all genders. So it can be in the format of the event, in the way you market it, in the imagery that is provided, in what kinds of activities are involved to sort of bring out that, make women and all genders more included and comfortable and confident.
It's a fantastic toolkit too, Caitlin. I've gone through it in detail and I really love it. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions going back to an earlier topic. I just want to make sure that we hear from the audience and do continue to send in questions. So this one is for Zara. Really think the idea of including equity work within a job description is a fantastic idea. It should be on every job description. So it's somewhat of a statement, but there's a question along those lines from Verna. One thing that some organizations are beginning to do is hiding identifiers from resumes to prevent bias from interfering in hiring practices. What are other ways to ensure that the end result is a more diverse workforce?
I can start. Hi, Mom. That's my mom who asked that question. So I've had the opportunity to help be on hiring panels before, and we've sort of taken the opposite approach, which is all of the identifiers are known, and we ask very specific equity questions and how well you do in the interview depends on how you answer those equity questions. For example, one of the first questions I was asked when I was brought into Integrate Alternatives is, why are people poor? And it is a very jarring question to receive when you're in a phone interview, but it really forces you to think about the structural, economic, racial, and climate reasons why we are in such a, why so many people are so disadvantaged. And one other thing I'll add about hiring is when I was on a hiring panel and I got to, we were looking for a technical manager, so someone who was going to be my boss. And so I was with the director of the SOMA program and another director, both of them men of color, but older than I am. And I was there with them. What the interviewees did not know was that I had veto power, because this person was going to be my boss and I was going to have to work with them. And I had been doing the work of kind of preparing the technical assistance part of the SOMA program to be ready to hand off to a technical manager. And unsurprisingly, most of the people we interviewed were men. In fact, I believe almost all the people we interviewed were men. And all of them looked towards who they saw was the authority figure. And it was clear that they were making much more eye contact with the two men I was with, and less so with me, but they did not know that I had veto power. So that they told us a lot about how the person had relationship to hierarchy, and their deference to hierarchy. And we are a very collaborative team. We have different titles, but we're really all thought partners in the work. And that a lot of that is due to our director. But so I would encourage folks to have, if you're hiring a manager and you have a person who they will manage, bringing them into the interview, and leaning away from that like hierarchy as expertise thing. And when you're interviewing, if you're interviewing in front of a group of people, you want to try and impress every single person that's there, regardless of who you think has the most status.
I remember when I interviewed for the Kauffman Fellow Society, they said after we did all the interviews, all of the interviewees came together and they said, we like to see how people treat the receptionist. That's one of the things they said. How do you treat the receptionist? So I appreciate that. There's a couple of comments I want to be sure to share. Someone said, Deepti says, totally agree on gender neutral bathrooms. And Sarah says, a justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion framework should be built into HR policies, procedures, hiring practices, and org-wide manuals. Organizations need to be authentic in walking their talk, and that starts first within. Believe it or not, we are almost at the end of our time, and boy, does it fly when we're having fun. So in the last 6 minutes that we have, there's a couple of things that came up in our previous discussion around leadership mindset, systems and accountability, collecting data, and the vision for the future. So let's just throw some of those things out there. And in these last 6 minutes, feel free to share any thoughts or ideas that you have on any of those things. Maybe Caitlin, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I think when it comes to, I guess, a leadership mindset, I think, you know, the teams that are leading this work really do need to be bold and ambitious in terms of what they want to achieve. And I love that comment around, you know, being authentic and walking the talk, and building that into the policies and procedures. I think that's one of the biggest reflections that have come from the organizations we've been working with, is even those that felt like they were gender inclusive, realized once they got into the program and the toolkit that they weren't being deliberate and explicit about a lot of the things that they should be doing or want to be doing. So, you know, some organizations are going as far as, you know, back to their incorporating documents and actually baking some of this into why they exist as an organization, which I think is amazing. But I think that is, you know, it really does take a commitment. And that means, you know, being willing to put aside the time and energy and budget, which I think are big barriers for a lot of organizations, as a few of us have reflected on. But then I think also we need to sort of have some patience and understand that it's not going to happen overnight. And I guess a sense of sensitivity and vulnerability around it. I think, you know, I've seen some teams kind of go really headstrong at this and be off, you know, put off certain members of the team because they are feeling like they're being attacked, or, you know, so I think there does need to be a sensitivity and I guess a feeling of this is a collective, collaborative process, and, you know, building that business case and talking about why it's so important. And, you know, in terms of the question around accountability, again, you know, I think it really goes back to setting up clear indicators for success, being really explicit in those values and policies, and then, you know, determining what success looks like. And having, you know, at YGAP, we've set up a working group around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so that is sort of who is overseeing and driving a lot of this work. And I think that, you know, having that kind of oversight, that the team does need to be on board, and there needs to be a business case in order to have that accountability. Yeah, that's sort of all for me in terms of accountability.
I think so. I think it's just important. This metaphor really works well for tech companies to write your existing code. So what's your code right now? So what's your code for interviewing? What's your code for looking for supply chains? What's your programming? And not all the parts of your programming are bad. And I think that's important to note. It's like we don't necessarily have to scrap everything and start from scratch. Sometimes we do though. But it's just looking at your existing code. So how do you conduct interviews now? And write that down, write that process down, because sometimes these things aren't written down somewhere. And so then you can understand how to lessen the bias. So for example, having a rubric sheet where you're actually stating your values. So going back to your company aspirations, your mission, vision, and values, making sure that those are following principles of equitable behavior and that they are aligned with creating an equitable environment. If you have those company values, then you can check your code against those values. And if they aren't aligned, then you can go ahead and find different methods to change that. And what's great about this is that you can be creative and adjust it to your company and what your mission is. So I think that when we're looking for diversity practices, we're often looking for like one size fits all. Like if I follow this, then I will have this result. But sometimes your company's a little different and you're operating with the confluence of all these different populations, and you know, who are you serving? What are you doing this for? How are you going on about it? I think those are more important questions actually than the actual practices. The practices are important, but I think the pre-work that goes into figuring out what you stand for and what your existing code is and analyzing your code, that's the bulk of the work. And after that, then you have your rubrics and you have your system. You have, you know, a person of color in the interview at the at different stages in the interview process, so that you can have a diversity of perspectives when you're looking at this hire. So there are different like practices that you can that are easy to implement, but first you have to look at your code and see what you're currently doing and what you're perpetuating with your current behaviors.
I'm going to put my thoughts on enterprise support organizations, because that's who I work with. I don't work with large companies, and I don't want to speak for them. But when it comes to a support organization, I feel some of the important things that we need to look at from a point of view of ensuring diversity is if the curriculum it talks about diversity or not. Are the case studies that you're referring to inclusive in nature and cater to everybody who's there in the program? Do we have the right mix of trainers, coaches, and mentors coming in to talk about different perspectives? And in the end, I think it's really data that speaks for itself. If you can show a business case, if you can show that this is going to be a profitable venture for sure, then I think nobody can question it. And the argument doesn't have to be based on just diversity, as has been pointed out, but I think finally showing that you have a good bottom line is important to showcase and build those capacities to for women-led or diverse groups to showcase this as their business case, to have that confidence to go and pitch out and say that yes, we are equal, and we are able to bring so and so profits to the table. I think that is what is important right now, and all of the support organizations should focus on this. Get in diverse people, even though it's not that easy. It does require a separate budget to reach out to different geographies as well, different kinds of outreach. Even the outreach material, has to speak in different languages to reach out to the right people. If that material is intimidating, you're not going to get a pool of diverse applications at all, or that itself may be a barrier. So there are many aspects to which we should look at this diversity lens in support organization, which should bring diversity in the ecosystem which is required right now.
I'll jump in with the vision.
Thank you so much. So this is in our final.
Oh, are we done?
Okay.
Sorry.
Wonderful. You read my mind, Sarah. No, it was in final minutes before we hand it back off and say our goodbyes. Yes, Zara, we'll start with you. What did you see 2030? The 2020s have passed them.
Ooh. I envision a world where the knowledge and wisdom of frontline communities is not only held, it's understood, it's backed with resources and capital to achieve those goals, with those that are most impacted leading the charge. I envision, I guess that would be the end of SOMA. So whatever the next realm of low-income solar programs, all learning their lessons from different experiments across the nation and across the world. I imagine a world free of violence and a commitment to understand, to repair, to restoration, and to transformation.
Natalie, what's your vision?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to think about that. Vision for me is a world where we can bring our full selves as human beings to every sphere of our lives. I think that sometimes the working world can feel a little mechanized, and we're expected to behave as robots, have no emotions, have no feelings, have no personal lives, and just to no children either. We've kind of relegated all of these different spheres of life to very separate, distinct kind of prisons. And I think that that's horrible because honestly, it just feels restrictive, and it feels, there's a lot of life that's missing from a lot of the other spheres of our lives. And I think that especially women feel that, I'm putting off family planning because A, climate change, B, I wouldn't want to have a child in the United States where there's no childcare on every corner. We're not thinking holistically about life. And I think that that's what led us here to the climate crisis, is that we're not really thinking about life and how we're interconnected and how we are physical and emotional beings all at the same time. And I think that a world where we can bring our full selves and express our gender identity, express our capabilities and talents, and especially our cultures. I think that we see divisions as or differences as something like liabilities, but I really think that the differences are the spice of life, and being able to have a solid conversation while maintaining respect for the other person's humanity. If that's mutually there, then we can achieve anything. So that's my vision for the world, is where we respect each other's humanity on a real level. Like, we protect human rights. We're not, it's not lip service. And we are also bringing our full selves to our work, which doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. So there's my vision for the world.
And rapid fire, Zui and then Caitlin.
Yep. This is a very good question. I think Natalie's covered most of what my thoughts are, but I just like to see a world without biases, which are just so inherent in society right now. Just looking at people without preconceived notions, preconceived expectations that they would behave a particular way, just letting them be and let them do what they want to the best of their capabilities, where capabilities are not restricted due to biases, and everybody's just free to work as long as it's for the good, and working towards a common goal of a good, clean, green future. I think that's all. It's pretty simple, and we've made it very complex. Just making it less complex, and yeah, I think that's what I look for.
I'll be quick. I think in the context of entrepreneurship or support organizations trying to incorporate these principles, I see our job as being finished. We can put our feet up when people of all genders, race, geographies, socioeconomic class, they all have an equal platform to launch and grow their ventures, and we can move beyond just measuring representation of these people at these levels, but also really capture and ensure inclusion on a deeper level. And in terms of climate change and clean energy, I hope that, all of these people really have the opportunity to drive the innovations that will decide their future ultimately.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for participating in this panel tonight. You've given so much food for thought. I have research to do, things to read, documentaries to watch. My mind is blown, and I could talk to each of you offline for another hour and a half at least. So thank you again for joining us tonight, and I'm going to hand it back over to Neha.
Wow, thank you all so much for sharing all of your thoughts, your experiences, and your resources. I agree that this conversation could go on for a really long time. And when I think about how we take the next steps to build a diverse and resilient clean energy ecosystem, I think it starts with these conversations. It starts with actually reading the resources that are being shared. It starts with showing up tomorrow and asking about what your organization's approach is to these matters, and also holding them accountable. So I'm really, really happy that we're here. I'm also really looking forward to the 2030 that you all imagined. And if you all have a little bit more curiosity to explore around what Accelerate Energy series is all about, I'm going to drop some links in the chat. You can check out the live streams. You can listen to this conversation again. And we also have a Miro board going for the entire series so that you can check out different resources, either on policy or the financial innovations in the report that happened today. And I will also be following up with everyone on this session to grab their links, figure out what guides we can put in one place, and really start to populate that a little bit more. I think the opportunity is here for us, and I'm really excited for the world that we are going to create for all beings. Thank you all so much for being here, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening, a wonderful weekend, and maybe we'll touch back again in a year from now and see what progress has been made, what changes we're seeing in the ecosystem, and that I hope that we'll see a lot. Yes. Keep dropping the links in. I know folks dialing in are eager to hear those, see those. Thank you all. Have a good night.
Thanks so much, Neha.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.